Good evening. The diagnosis is dire. We're living in a deeply unhealthy society, says the Prime Minister, riven by division and decline. The cure? A grand-sounding independent commission on community and cohesion, which has just started work, warning Britain is a tinderbox of disconnection and division that threatens democracy itself. An existential problem, then, if not an obviously urgent one. The commission is a response to the riots after the Southport stabbings very nearly a year ago. It has another year to come up with ways to make us get on better with each other, to develop what it calls a greater sense of belonging. Lots of questions here. First, is it really that much of a problem? There are those who say summer riots are not exactly new, and surveys of social attitudes suggest we're getting steadily less prejudiced, one of the most tolerant countries in the world, in fact. Second, is social cohesion really a moral imperative? Canadians, for instance, prefer to see their society as a mosaic rather than a melting pot, and the scandal over Pakistani grooming gangs seems to some as a consequence of prioritising community relations over justice. Lastly, is the objective, community at a local level, camaraderie at a national level, a shared vision of how we want to live together, achievable by government action? What price social cohesion? The Moral Maze tonight. The panel, Mona Siddiqui, Professor of Islamic and Interreligious Studies at Edinburgh University, the columnist and broadcaster Sonia Sodha, the commentator and campaigner Inaya Folarin Iman, and the former Supreme Court Judge, Lord Sumption, Jonathan Sumption. Sonia Sodha, social cohesion is a slightly slippery concept, isn't it? Is it something you feel strongly about?
It is. And the reason for that is I think that Britain's becoming a more racially diverse society, which I think could be a very positive outcome for us. But I also think at a time when we've got stagnating living standards, the polarising force of social media, it's also got the potential to create resentment. So I think it's really important that policymakers think consciously about how to promote more tolerance and higher levels of trust. And I think sometimes the Liberal left just feels it's a bit too icky to talk about.
Mona Siddiqui?
I do believe there are limits to pluralism, but I don't see social cohesion as an existential issue. Yes, there are issues, but politicians should stop telling us how broken and polarised we are all the time. You can't legislate for empathy or compel people to trust each other, and coerced loyalty often leads to resentment, not unity.
Inaya?
Social cohesion is associated with trust, confidence in institutions and safe and secure neighbourhoods, things that we morally value, but failure to challenge harmful practices in minority cultural groups is breeding resentment and creating the conditions for major social disorder.
Jonathan Sumption.
Well, of course, social cohesion is a moral good, but that's a bit like saying that happiness is a good thing. The question is how to get there. Human beings naturally mix with their own kind, people with ethnic, social, educational or cultural identities in common. We're not going to get wider cohesion unless there's some focus of loyalty that transcends those differences. And that has to happen spontaneously. Any number of commissions is not going to create it.
Panel, thanks very much indeed. Our first witness is Matthew Syed, who's a columnist and broadcaster of this Radio 4 parish, indeed, on the line now. Matthew, do you think things need to be done in policy terms to help us get on better together? And if so, is this commission likely to be the way to do it?
Evening, everybody. Thanks for having me on. A couple of things I perhaps would start with. Firstly, I hope it's not too controversial a point to make to say that I think we live in a great country. And I don't think that we are at existential risk yet when it comes to ethnic and cultural divides. You want to see tribal division, go to sub-Saharan Africa, go to the Middle East, go to Lebanon, go to Syria. Around the world, and I have family in many parts of the world, you see deep sectarianism of a kind that breaks trust, makes it almost impossible to form coherent shared institutions, and where civil conflict is still endemic in many parts of the world. And we don't have that here. And when I think of the arc, the trajectory of my life, I'm a mixed-race boy. My father came here from Pakistan. He met my mum, who is a white, red-headed girl from a farming community in Wales. They fell in love, and both families were against it. They said, don't do it. You'll have mixed-race kids. Don't visit that upon them. Fortunately for me and my siblings, they rejected that advice, had a tremendous marriage. And I think that marriage for my father was a bridge into a fantastic and often very welcoming society. And I think we need to have that framing. However, and this is where the but comes in, I think the very large-scale immigration over recent years, completely unprecedented in history, has led to certain pockets within our community living insular lives where they don't connect into the broader community, where there are parallel cultures. And I think that is a major risk for them and for us.
Mona.
Matthew, many people in public life, when they claim that multiculturalism has failed, they usually only refer to one religious community, Muslims. Would you agree with that?
Well, I do think there is a problem with some Muslims. I don't like the indiscriminate term Muslim applying to everybody who subscribes to that faith. As you know, there are many different variants. Islamism, I think, is a risk.
Okay.
And those communities that tend to marry within their small clan, that's where extremism can often fester. These communities, these clans are often held together by cousin marriage.
Okay.
And I do think...
Can I just stop you there, because I want to probe this. You mean Islamism and not Muslims, or not all Muslims. So I want to talk about something quite concrete, which is that I consider myself completely at ease in Britain, my home. I've contributed to public life in some small way, but I do observe halal slaughter, and this has been in the news quite recently. Does this make me less integrated?
I personally would ban that. I think that we should make judgments based on what we think is rationally correct, and that we shouldn't allow religious sensibilities to intrude upon the law where it affects things that are of a high ethical status. That's a slightly convoluted way of saying that I think that if we feel that animal welfare is compromised by kosher and halal, we should ban it on those grounds. So I'm a reasonably muscular.
Okay, but if your concern is...
Well, I wouldn't in any way say that you're any less British for that point of view.
Let me just press you on this, because if liberalism protects freedom of belief and expression, why is this particular religious practice an exception? If your concern is animal suffering, then why not begin with industrial meat practices that are systematically abusive?
No, I agree. I mentioned, in addition to halal, kosher, and if one could be persuaded that the industrial meat practices are unethical and there is not a corresponding good that is conferred to society, we should ban that too. I think if you're getting at the point that sometimes we attack Islamic practices as a way of tarnishing all Muslims, I kind of agree with you on that. I think that is a big risk for us, and we mustn't do it. The thing that I hate about racism is where somebody's skin pigmentation is taken as a indicator of who they are as a person. We lose the nuance and individualism. And these big terms like Muslim or Islam, I think we need to be more subtle in how we engage.
But the two practices that you have pointed out, halal slaughter and cousin marriages, are prevalent amongst many Muslim societies. So it's very easy to see where actually the logic of what you're saying could refer to whole swathes of a community. But even if we put Islam to one side, would you say then the Windrush generation, South Asian doctors in the NHS, post-war Caribbean and African communities, they weren't really pushing identity politics, they were building Britain. And isn't it reductive to frame social cohesion, or the lack of it, as almost like a cultural indulgence rather than part of Britain's social infrastructure?
I don't know if you've been to any of these communities in Rochdale and other places where people are living with their first and second cousins in very tight social groups that have very little to do with the wider community. There's deep studies on this. This is a real problem for them, because it means that often people, if I could just finish the point, can be oppressed within that community. They don't get the many advantages that can be conferred by this fantastic society. And it's worth, I think, anyone who hasn't read the evidence on cousin marriage as a mechanism of social sequestration, just to look at the data.
I agree with you.
States in America with bans on cousin marriage, they grow faster. The institutions are stronger. It's true all around the world.
I agree completely.
I want to liberate people to take advantage of these societies. And often when you have these small, incestuous, insular communities, it's a tragedy for them and for us. That's not racism. I would apply that cousin marriage rule to all communities, but it is particularly strong, if I may say so. And I say this as somebody whose father came from Pakistan, and actually once on a trip to Karachi said to me when I was very young, do you want to marry a cousin? It intrigued me, this idea. I think we need to ban cousin marriage.
Jonathan Sumption?
You say that social cohesion between across different ethnic groups has greatly improved in your lifetime, and I'm sure you're right about that. It was a spontaneous process, wasn't it? Nobody ordered it to happen.
Yeah, I agree with you. And it was a beautiful process. You know, when I was at school as a mixed race kid, I was the only brown skinned boy in a state school in suburban Reading. A lot of the other kids used the P word and the N word. The teachers used the P word. I remember going to watch England at Wembley, the England men's football team. It was the first time a black player had played for the national team. I was very young, 8 or 9. We only just could afford the tickets. I remember Wembley,
we agree. I want to stop you because we agree about that. I'd like to come to something which we don't agree on, or may not agree on. Would you agree that the main reason why social cohesion has improved across different ethnic groups is that people have found other things in common which transcended those differences?
Partly. The N, just to finish that story, the N word was shouted down from the stands at Viv Anderson, a black player. You just don't get that at football now. And you're right, these shared passions, football and many other things. But the key, Jonathan, is that if you have relatively modest immigration, then people begin to, as it were, find the bridges that connect them with the indigenous population. But when you have mass immigration, you can recreate the old communities in the new place, if I may put it that way.
Well, I don't doubt that. But would you accept that if people find other things in common that transcend their ethnic differences, that just means that instead of society being fragmented on ethnic lines, it is fragmented on educational, cultural or class lines, for example?
That's right. And the ethnic divisions have a very profound power when they exist in any given community, whereas the differences on class lines or educational lines, as long as that coexists with a deeper loyalty to the shared community, to the nation state, then I have no problem with any of these other divisions.
But people,
if you look at the
naturally mix with those with whom
ethnic...
they have some affinity, don't they?
That's right. That's right.
Now, if you've got a special commission involved in this, what can that do to help?
Well, the major thing it would need to do, I think, having community hubs and all these policies that are designed or planned to try and get people to connect, it will have very little significance. It'll look good, and you'll be able to take TV cameras along to a community hub and pretend that it's making a difference, but I don't think it will, except on the margins. I think you just need to have a...
But if you're going to bring about a wider measure of social cohesion, you have to find, don't you, some source of solidarity which transcends other differences, e.g. patriotism.
Well, that's right. But the interesting thing, Jonathan, is when people begin to integrate into Britain, and I can tell you my father was one of the great patriots, because he had opportunities here he would not have had in Pakistan. He could see that the divisions in this country, though significant in the 70s and 80s, were nothing like he had in his homeland. And he came to love this country. And you see this with many immigrants.
But the point about this is that higher identity, which we both agree is important, it can't be created by law. It can't be created by regulation or by spending more money or delivering hectoring sermons, can it?
We're on the same page on that one.
I think we are.
Okay. And on that note of agreement, thank you very much, Matthew Syed, for joining us this evening. Our next witness is Simon Levine, who's a senior research fellow at the ODI, a think tank, which is actually strangely shy about telling us what those initials stand for. But anyway, it looks at social and community relations worldwide in development terms, but can bring that perspective to bear now here at home. Do you think the idea of social cohesion is sufficiently defined, is sufficiently almost existentially important for us as a society to merit a commission and presumably later government action to try to bring it about?
I think there's two very different parts to that question. The first is about social cohesion itself and the second about the commission. I think on social cohesion, no, it's not at all defined. And And that's fine, because most concepts like that are pretty woolly, and we get by. The only problem comes when we start to try and treat it as if it was one single thing that we could kind of measure and engineer. My work has looked at refugees in many countries, not in this one, but in Africa and Asia, and looking at their lives. And lots of aid agencies go in and say, well, we want to build social cohesion, usually meaning reduce resentment between them and what in our jargon we call host populations. And if you look at people's lives, social relations are a complete contradiction. It's a very amorphous beast, and processes happen in different directions. You can do one thing which will aid one aspect of how people get on, but it might hinder another aspect of what people get on. So what you really got to do is just understand it. So if the Commission is going to help the government and policymakers have a better insight into people's lives and how people feel about their lives, then wonderful. If it's trying to come up with a solution to engineer social cohesion, then I think it's probably not going to succeed.
Sonia.
Hi, Simon. So I was born in Croydon in the 1980s to immigrant parents. I'm a second-generation immigrant. And my parents made a huge effort to make sure that we were mixing with people who were diverse from us, and not just within our own community. And I personally feel like my life has been much richer for that, and that I've done better in life as a result. Don't you think that that's a social good that government should be encouraging?
I think it was a personal good for you, definitely. I think that's not the same as saying it's a social good. Like you, I'm also, my grandparents were immigrants to this country. They probably didn't move outside their community very much because of anti-Semitism in the wider community. By the time it came to my father's generation, they did. Life is much richer. If you look at, when I work at, overseas, if you look at what they're called expat communities, because they're not called migrants when they're white and well-off and privileged. But in those communities, if you look at Europeans, they never move out. Very, very many of them never move outside their circles. They socialise within their group, make no attempt whatsoever to learn the national languages or local languages. Is that a problem? Personally, I think that they are missing out on something huge. So I think they're missing out on a personal good. But listen, there's no reason why they should live their lives the way I want to live mine. That's their business. But are they creating any harm for anybody else? I don't see that.
But isn't it more than a personal good in light of the academic evidence, which shows that the more people mix with people from different ethnic backgrounds, that fosters a society with less prejudice? And to me, that is a social good. That is something we should be encouraging. And there's quite a big body of academic work that shows that.
I'm a bit worried about the way in which discussions about social cohesion and social relations always get racialised and ethnicised. If we're looking at the divides in this country, people don't mix across class lines. And I've not heard that being discussed. The big, big barrier. If multicultural Britain, what about the integration of the different classes? We haven't seen that at all. And I think that's a much bigger problem. I don't see the problem. If certain communities want to live their lives within their own little world, I personally think they're missing out on something. I don't see that they necessarily bring harm, as long as they're not causing problems for anybody else.
But let's look at where that can foster resentment and problems. So in the early 2000s, we saw a series of riots across northern England. The expert Ted Cantle did a big report for the government, and he commented on the fact that some people in some communities were living parallel lives. They were segregated by schools, by workplaces, by residential areas. And his view, and it was accepted at the time, was it wasn't just social deprivation. Those parallel lives generated resentment that led to those riots.
Absolutely. But there's always more than one thing going on. If the question is about people's choice on how to live their lives, I'm not making any choices for anybody else. I'll make the best choices for my lives. I'll try and encourage my children to make good choices. They'll decide if they're good or bad. Other people, I'm not going near that. What is really important is that people have got the opportunity to integrate. And the barriers to integration need bringing down. And I hope, for example, that the Commission will look at things like that. If people living on a street feel that they have to stay on their street because they're not safe in the next street, they don't have opportunities, they can't afford it, their kids can't mix with the children from the next street, that's a huge problem for them and for this country, for this society, 100%. But if it's their choice to say, look, this is our little world, we're very happy here, we're not causing problems for anyone else, why should I worry about that?
Because I think if people live insular lives and that causes resentments, that is an issue for society. That choice to live an insular life is not a good choice.
Listen, I've got an awful lot of resentment about how many people in this country live their lives, but I wouldn't say I have a right to be resentful. I just am, but I'm not kind of going out and demanding that because I don't like the way they live their lives, they should live them the way I want them to.
Inaya.
Simon, do you think that we have a moral responsibility to people outside of our social group?
Yes, of course. I wouldn't be working in the international aid sector if I didn't believe that.
Well, because a lot of what you're saying to me sounds like we should essentially be politely indifferent, because is there a risk that in the name of respecting difference, we then start turning a blind eye to certain moral harms, for example, gender inequality, authoritarian religious control, that is happening within insular communities?
Again, I don't like the way this immediately gets racialised.
No.
I'm sorry, 1 second. Gender inequality is absolutely rife in the world. It's rife in white society. It's rife in black.
That's not what we're talking about.
No, but when you said gender inequality, you linked it specifically to minority groups, often religious minorities or racial minorities.
These are some of the concerns that people are raising. So do you think that we were right or wrong to ban, for example, forced marriage or female genital mutilation?
Right, correct. It was right. Yes.
Okay, so
yes.
on what basis are we doing that? If it's being done within an insular community and they're saying that these are their moral values and this is part of what keeps them cohesive and they're not harming anyone outside of that community, on what basis do we ban those things?
Okay, so first of all, it's got nothing to do with integration at all. Whether or not people who practice female genital mutilation are integrated into the wider society isn't the point.
It is, because the norms of the wider society are opposed to that, but in that minority community, they may regard that as something that they value or see as right.
Yes, and we say that human beings, that there are certain human rights which every person has, doesn't matter what religion they're in. And therefore they need protecting. And I don't see what that has got to do. First of all, I don't think that's got anything yes, certain practices are associated with certain cultural groups, but the idea that there are harmful practices, I heard it, I think, in one of the early speakers, harmful practices always immediately linked to minority groups, as if there weren't harmful practices
I think on this
groups.
programme we talk about a whole range of things, but specifically on social cohesion. What about, for example, when certain cultural practices come into conflict with the rights of wider societies? So take the issue of the Batley Grammar School teacher. There were those who said that blasphemy was offensive to their religious beliefs, and that meant that certain people thought that other people should be censored on that basis. So what do you do then?
Really, really difficult. I mean, this is because if we go in with the view that there is kind of one moral principle that we want to follow, anyone who acts like that is a danger, usually to themselves and frequently to the rest of the world. What do you mean? What about freedom of speech? Well, exactly. That's exactly what I mean. Going through life is all about recognising that there are competing moral demands. There are competing principles, competing objectives, and we've got to make the best judgments we can on how to balance them. Freedom of speech is an enormous value. It's not absolute. None of us believe it's absolute. None of us believe in our own families that we can say whatever we want to say. Because why? Because we are aware of the impact that has on the people around us. If you like self-censor...
So you're quite happy for wider society to sacrifice certain values that it holds important, because you presumably are saying that people don't have to compromise anything, that you can just maintain your identity. But I would say that freedom of speech is a value that is core to our identity. And if people oppose that and take measures to oppose that is a threat to social cohesion and a threat to our wider society.
I have no idea why you thought that I said that some people have to compromise values and other people don't. I said that we all, in all of our lives, every day, we have to balance different competing objectives and different competing principles. I have to balance.
What does that mean in the specific example of Batley Grammar School? Should the teacher never have showed the image of the Prophet, or should the protesters have been curtailed from doing that?
Okay, so I don't know enough about that specific situation. I would like to live in a world where people can criticise other people's religion and do it respectfully. And I would like to live in a society where the people of minority faiths don't feel threatened by that kind of criticism. And I think we need to work very, very hard in all directions for that situation to happen. Because intolerance is not on the majority side or on the minority side. Intolerance is part of the human condition. And you will find intolerant people in every single community. So I'm not defending one community against another. I'm saying all of us need to show tolerance, not tolerance, acceptance of other people's views, but the greater onus lies upon those people who are less threatened. That's all I'm saying.
Simon and Levine, thank you very much indeed. Our next witness is Julie Siddiqui, who's a Muslim convert, in fact, and grassroots campaigner promoting understanding between different religions and ethnic groups. Julie Siddiqui, do we need a government, or at least actually in this case a government-backed commission, to tell us how to get on with each other?
I think actually the commission seems to me, so far from what I've seen, to be very positive. I think they're covering a number of different things. I think one of the main positives about it actually is it's a conversation with people on the ground. And I also think that the other positive about it is the range of commissioners they have is the best range I've ever seen, I think, on any commission. So I think for me, those things are very positive. I think what it is looking at, it seems to me, are two main things. One is, and I haven't heard it mentioned here at all today, but actually the whole fact around loneliness and the fact that we are all individual, there's a lot of individualism now, that people are really struggling to connect with each other anyway. And then I think if we add into that the issues around social cohesion, the kind of stuff that we've been talking about, I think these 2 points have to run alongside each other. And it seems to me this commission is looking at both of those. And I think that's very positive.
Jonathan Sumption?
Julie, would you agree that it's a natural characteristic of human beings to want to mix socially with people of their own kind, people who share their ethnicity, their class, their educational level, their outlook on life and so on?
Yeah, I think it is, but I think that all of us are made up of different layers. So I'm, for example, Muslim, I'm British, very proud to be both British Muslim. I'm a mum, I'm English, I live in Slough. I have lots of multiple layers of my identity. And I think that I can then connect with people in different ways in different parts of that. And I think all of that is very positive. So I don't think it's just that we have to connect on in one way. I think the more we can connect and find the things that we have in common, the better. So I think that is why I see it as a positive that we have all of these different layers.
If it's a natural characteristic of human beings to want to mix with people of their own kind, that means, doesn't it, that in a highly diverse society like ours, it's also likely to be a more fragmented society?
No, I mean, I think that we as human beings have a natural need to connect with others. We're not individual beings. We need to be in community. And I think that the more diverse that is, the better. So I think that the idea that people have to live just within the community and people that are like them, I don't think that's a positive.
But the less that people have in common, surely, the more fragmented the society is going to be.
No, I think that people have to find what they have in common, and often we're made to think that we don't have things in common with others from different backgrounds or from different places. And I don't think that's true. I think we have much more in common than that which divides us, as we often hear, and I do really believe in that. So I think that the idea that we have to just look at people that are the same as us and connect with them, I think is negative, and that's really what some of this commission is about.
I'm not suggesting that people have to do that. I'm suggesting that in practice that they do. Now, I think you are suggesting that any tendency of society to fragmentation can be overcome by people meeting and talking to each other. And you set up events at which that can happen. Mm-hmm. That is your position, isn't it?
Yeah.
Now, surely social cohesion is going to involve something rather more fundamental than that. I mean, you can have a perfectly courteous discussion with somebody who takes a radically different view about, say, immigration or Gaza. But that doesn't mean that you want to go on a walking tour with them if they're not your type.
I think that I firmly believe that the more people meet, the more they break down the barriers, the more they work through stereotypes. There's a lot of stereotypes, a lot of misconceptions. I've even heard some of them already talked about on this programme, the idea that we kind of look at one small group and think that the issues that we have around the country are because of a small group of people, I think is frankly absurd, what I've heard here. So I think that
A famous historian once observed that the more people get to know people unlike themselves, the more likely they are to conceive a deep and lasting hatred of them.
I don't agree with that person.
No, that may be putting it too extreme a way, but there's something there in it, isn't there?
No, I think that the more, as I say, the more we know people, I've seen it happen too many times for me to not know that it works. That when people, so much of what we're talking about in terms of divisions, the social, the unrest that we've seen, I heard it mentioned earlier about the riots, and it was almost minimised. And actually, it's quite easy to minimise when you're not really somebody who's so directly affected by that. But I know people who are genuinely very scared of how quickly that spread throughout more than 25 towns and cities around the UK last year and are still feeling the fear of that now. So I think we have to look at the fact that when those things happen, it really does impact people. And many people felt they never would see that again, the like of that. And we did. So I think we all have a duty together in this country to really think about what is going on. Let's have these conversations, which is why I think this commission is brilliant. And let's think about what we can do better, what's working, what isn't. And, let's have those sometimes also difficult conversations as well.
Mona Siddiqui.
Julie, should the government be telling you who you should be friends with?
No, and I don't think that's what this commission is about, actually. I see it very much as a conversation between people like all of us, actually, and people in different places. And some of those conversations with this commission, I'm sure, will be quite difficult to hear. But I don't think this is what this commission is about. And no, I don't think the government should tell me who I should be friends with.
OK, the reason I'm asking is that governments constantly instill fear and speak of division, knowing that organisations such as yours, your Nissan Ashim organisation, will try to pick up the pieces. And I'm trying to think, what should the purpose and a set of objectives be of this commission? How would we know if it's successful?
So I think that the way I'm going to judge it is on the depth and breadth of the conversations with the people that they have those conversations with, and then come up with really evidence-based suggestions and recommendations that come from the people. So that's, for me, how I'm going to judge how good this commission is going to be.
But you're already involved in a grassroots interfaith project like Nissan Ashim. And I just wonder, you've done a lot of work with Jewish and Muslim women, and a lot of interfaith organisations have said to me that since October the 7th, they've really struggled. So you're talking about conversations that people should have, dismantling preconceptions, prejudices. When something real happens, like a conflict like that, how does interfaith work? Does it work?
No, look, it's fair to say that I've been involved in this work a long time. I do more than just working with people of faiths as well and working across communities. I've never seen something happen in another country that's had the impact that that's had here. So this is kind of unique in that sense. And I think that I still see the benefit in doing this work. I'm not getting off the bridge. I'm still staying on. I still think it's important. But I think it does have to require friendships. It needs trust. It needs integrity. And so for me, seeing how difficult it's been doesn't mean that it's failed. So I still think it's very important.
No, I understand personally for you might not have failed, but do well-meaning events that are organised by people like yourself, do they really translate into enduring institutional reform?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen so much good come from the kind of work that I and so many others are involved with. And of course, we're in difficult times, but I think we use some of those models that work.
I'm talking about policy.
No, so I think that, look, one of the things that we need to do, and that's why I welcome this, is that we do need to be able to influence. We do need to look at what's working and what isn't. Most of these grassroots initiatives, the kinds that you're talking about, have not had any investment or anything from government whatsoever.
Yes,
we haven't invested in cohesion. We haven't invested in communities. We haven't invested in people coming together.
But we are investing in a commission which is basically going to tell you what you already know. Let's be honest.
I think that this commission comes at a very important time in the history of this country, actually. I really do. And I think, yes, I've been involved a long time. I still remain very optimistic about this commission, really because I think the breadth and depth of it will be what we need. And I'm not saying it will have all the answers to everything, but I do think that from what I'm reading so far, it feels to me, looking at these issues around loneliness and how different we are as a society and these issues that have occurred in terms of division, both of those things together are really important.
And sorry to talk over you. You wear a hijab. Do people see you? You gave a preamble about how fortunate you feel being Muslim and British. Do people see you as less integrated?
So I think some people do. There's no doubt about that. I think there's a huge misconceptions around Muslim women. People don't quite know what to do with somebody like me because I am very comfortable in my skin. I'm very comfortable in my faith. I do work, for example, I do a lot of work locally in my community in Slough. And I can honestly tell you that when you're helping people and supporting people, no one cares about the headscarf. People just care about what you're doing to help them, and you connect on a heart-to-heart level, which for me is really important.
Julie Siddiqui, thanks very much indeed. Our last witness is Ravi Gurumurthy, who's Group Chief Executive of Nesta, the Social Innovation Agency. A lot of the rhetoric around this has been pretty apocalyptic, hasn't it? The famous island of strangers from the Prime Minister, the idea that our society is a tinderbox. Is that how you see it? And what, if anything, needs to be done?
So I think the surprising thing is when you actually look at the facts, Britain stands out as an outlier for being incredibly positive in terms of its race relations. So if you look at, for instance, the number of people in the UK who say immigrants have had a very or good impact, the figure is at 55%. Compare that to Germany, 27%, France, 27%, even America's only at 40%. So we are better in many ways than others. Even if you think about crime, 22% of the UK think immigration increases the crime rate. That's the lowest of 18 countries surveyed by the World Values Survey. America's at 31%, Germany's at 61%. So I think we should start by saying we have got an incredible track record of integration in this country, great race relations, unusually so. But we've obviously got particular issues in particular places, and those need dealing with. But I don't think it's great to start with this alarmism, which, frankly, the Prime Minister kicked off with the Island of Strangers comment.
Inaya?
So I agree with you, Ravi, that we have a positive story to tell. But the reality is that, when you look at a lot of the polling, immigration is one of the highest concerns that people have in this country. We're seeing it with the support for reform, primarily on an immigration platform. So to what extent do you think that mass immigration and the perceived sense that this has not been tackled is a threat to social cohesion?
So I think with immigration, having 600,000 people come in 2 years running is way higher than we've ever had for decades, and that is an issue. Ditto when you see the problem with both small boats or with the hotels. Those are also things that are easily seized upon by the right.
But is it a threat to social cohesion?
It is a threat to social cohesion when the right mobilises and uses those grievances to make an issue of it. Now, it's interesting, when you actually ask people, is this an issue for them? Is immigration an issue for them? It's very low. It's in the single digits. Well, it's an issue because this is, brought up on social media. It's mobilised by political entrepreneurs who want to make a deal out of it.
Can I push back on you on that? Because I think this is what a lot of people find really frustrating and actually kind of builds resentment, that when people bring up things that they're concerned about, such as the pace and scale in their community, the fact that they might feel displaced or unheard, many people respond saying, oh, no, that's not how you should feel because you're actually being exploited by the right. Do you not think that anybody can have valid concerns or legitimate concerns about what's happening in their communities around immigration?
I think it is valid to be concerned about immigration levels at 600,000 because it is hard to build the number of houses to accommodate that number of people. It will obviously put a strain on certain public services. So I think it's fair to say...
So you're acknowledging that there are concrete material trade-offs?
Yes, but your question was, is this a threat to social cohesion? That is a big claim. And my point is that, yes, we should potentially try and reduce immigration levels, which are already coming down. But let's not catastrophise this and say that we are going to face some existential threat and start turning inwards.
Well, I think those kind of material concerns can play into social concerns. If you're in an impoverished community and you feel like there's competition over resources and the way it's being distributed to newcomers is unfair, then that kind of builds social resentment as well. So those material concerns can translate into social concerns.
But let's see, what's really happening here is there are some concerns. There are issues that have to be dealt with, but these are turbocharged and amplified by social media and then by opportunists on the right who decide to try and make a big deal out of it. So yes, it is an issue, but let's not pretend that the real problem here that is ripping through all Western societies is social media and the far right.
Okay, but so for example, if you take something like the grooming gang scandal, that wasn't just mobilised by the right, that was a kind of real scandal that institutions acted with cowardice and in the name of kind of protecting community relations. So you're talking about social media and political entrepreneurs, but actually a lot of people are seeing concrete issues that are not being dealt with that are actually real.
There are proper grievances, there are problems which institutions get wrong, but the point is they are amplified. And the same happens on the other side. So what's happening in Gaza has also caused much more division in this country than it would have otherwise done without social media and politicians being able to exploit that. So yes, there are real issues, there are real grievances, but why is it becoming difficult? It's because of the new context we live in. Teenagers spend 127 minutes a day on TikTok. They're not getting the moral maze, they're getting all sorts of garbage. And that is one of the problems with what we're dealing with. And it's partly about looking at that media environment and the information diet that people have. Because unless we tackle that, we will not get the cohesion we need.
I'm quite sceptical of the idea that if we just kind of regulated social media, that the grooming gang scandal, for example, wouldn't have happened. I think a lot of people are seeing real problems within their communities around, the behaviour of certain newcomers, the ideological beliefs, the attitudes to women or gay people or minorities, and they're expressing concerns about that.
The grooming gang scandal happened. Of course, that was nothing to do with social media, but what was to do with social media was the riots that happened afterwards, because we had misinformation and lies.
But when are we going to
So
spend as much time talking about social media and regulating as we do actually the concrete issues that people are talking about and saying is the thing that is actually the problem for them?
Well, we've got a national, we've got a public inquiry into it. Of course, you should deal with all the issues. We're spending loads of time discussing small boats, discussing grooming gangs. What we need to do is actually tackle some of the other issues that are amplifying division.
Sonia.
So, Ravi, I'm interested in what you think we should be doing to promote more social or community cohesion, apart from making it compulsory for everyone to listen to the Moral Maze, of course.
Well, let me give you an example of a really fascinating solution from a former colleague of mine, Salma Musa, who worked in Iraq with with people who were affected by ISIS. And what she did was she took Iraqi Christians and randomly assigned them into football leagues, some with just Christians, some with mixed teams of Christians and Muslims. And what she showed was that when you do have people in contact with others, they are more likely to then vote for Muslims. They're more likely to choose mixed teams in the future. Now, they may not form great, deep friendships, but they do develop tolerance and a sense that it is normal to fraternise with others. And that's an example of what people call the contact hypothesis. And I think we need loads more experiments along those lines, actual experiments, because what we don't have is empirical evidence of what works. A commission is fine, but what we need is trials.
So I'm really with you on that. I mean, I find the contact hypothesis very appealing. I think there is some evidence that it works if you sort of use policy to get people to mix more in places like schools, sports, etc. My concern about it, though, is whether it goes far enough. And I'm talking about the really sharp issues with social cohesion. I agree it's not catastrophic, but Inaya mentioned Batley, the case of the Batley teacher with a previous witness. There's the grooming gang scandals. In some of these issues, we know that what's going on is that public officials and politicians are not tackling these issues because they're scared of being accused of racism or scared of upsetting cultural sensitivities. That isn't going to be tackled by people mixing more, is it? We need something more muscular.
No, I mean, those issues need to be dealt with. You're absolutely right. If you try to avoid dealing with them, it will come back to bite you as it has done here. And I think you're also right to say those sort of programmes where you increase contact between different groups are good, but the effect size is going to be small rather than transformational. But I would start with the fact that we're actually doing pretty well. If we can do small, meaningful things that bridge divides, that bring different communities together, I think you can actually make a difference and move things in the positive direction. But I do come back to this point that what is driving this is the information diet and then on political opportunists making a big thing out of it.
But I don't think it's just that, is it? And, one of the things I find so shocking about what happened in Batley or with the grooming gangs is that really people in positions of power who should have known better were just too scared to challenge sometimes criminal practices. We've had in some Birmingham schools, we've had evidence of children being taught in very monocultural schools, state-funded schools, completely inappropriate things about the role of men and women in society. And, we find it very hard to tackle it. So I guess my question is, apart from mixing, what should we be doing as a society? It's not good enough to say institutions should just step up because they're not.
Well, I don't think we know exactly, why those individuals didn't actually do what they should have done, because you're absolutely right, you have to deal with them. So I don't particularly want to speculate on those particular cases. But what I would say is, when you think about what needs to happen more generally, I would highlight a few things. One is actually economic mobility, because what you see typically is when communities get richer, they intermarry more, they tend to move out of any ethnic enclave. So ethnic enclaves are an issue, and where you have very close-knit communities that do not have much of a bridge to others, that's not desirable. But it tends to disappear with prosperity, and that's probably the thing that will make a big difference over the next 10 years.
And do you think that's true, even though, I look at living standards, they've stagnated. It's not clear where growth is going to come from. I think this is why this could be a growing issue, not a shrinking issue.
I'm not going to pretend that there's an optimistic story to tell right now on growth, but I think that is the key to actually tackling this issue. We have to deal with the economic dimension and we have to deal with social media. Those are the structural factors. And then there are smaller things we can do around bringing different groups together. That's probably the main solution.
Ravi Gurumurthy, thank you very much indeed. Well, panel, what do we make of all that? Mona, I thought all our witnesses seemed markedly less apocalyptic about social cohesion in this country than those involved with or backing this new commission.
I think that social cohesion, integration is often invisible when it works. And it's only when something has failed, and our last speaker was talking about this, that it sticks out so much because it's amplified more and more now. And then it's leapt upon as a way of saying, this is why we have too much immigration, we have too much division, the whole of society is going to pot. But actually, when you look at what happened after Grenfell, when you look at what happened after the Southport attacks, it actually shows that we are actually really good at coming together. There are issues in every society. But what happens often is when something happens, social media, I'm not attacking social media as a structural thing, but it has become very successful at amplifying all that's wrong in society, because companies, the owners of these companies, know that there's money to be made in division. And I think that we don't tell enough stories about how people come together, and we focus too much on what is disintegrating in society.
Jonathan, the witnesses, in fact, quite a number of people this evening were talking, in Matthew Syed's case, really quite lyrically about growing up in a multicultural Britain and how prejudice had fallen off, and until recently, at least. You talked of that was because people found other things to transcend whatever their racial or ethnic differences might have been.
Yes, that seems to me to be the fundamental point. That you need, you can't remove differences of outlook. We're talking about one of the most profound and consistent characteristics of human beings. What we can hope for is that there will be other factors which, as I put it, transcend those differences. Now, I would say that one of the most significant dividing lines in Britain, which corresponds to many political and social and economic divisions as well, is education. Now, education is probably the most significant factor in deciding, enabling people to decide what kind of person am I and what kind of person do I want to mix with. So I think that one thing that the public sector can achieve is that improving the standard of education is likely to give people more in common and to improve the situation. But it won't radically transform it. It will improve it from what I agree is already quite a satisfactory base.
Matthew Syed in particular was talked about an uptick, or I didn't put in quite those words, but an uptick in problems relatively recently, and was fairly clear about why that might have been, and settled on things like migration numbers, net migration numbers, and customs like cousin marriage and so on.
Yeah,
what did you make of that?
Yeah, I think it's. I think it was right that Matthew talked about the progress that he has seen in his lifetime, and I think that it is right to talk about the positive story that we have in this country. But I do think there is a danger of because there is this positive story that we can tell, that we use that as a way of shutting down the not so positive story that does exist. And I think that was part of the point that Matthew was trying to make, that actually the positive story should not overlook the real and harmful underlying problems that we do have. And I think that he is right to point to immigration. We have had extraordinary levels, and actually many people did vote against that. So there's a kind of moral question in terms of democratic consent. And if people feel that democracy isn't delivering things that they prioritise and vote for, then I think that is a risk in terms of destabilising the social order.
Sonia, he was saying that apart from the feeling of people who actually already live in this country, that their society is being changed by large net inward migration, there was also the point that the incomers were then recreating their old communities in a new setting, which rather emphasised difference.
Yes, I think that does go on in some communities in the UK. In fact, I think there are huge differences in the way that immigrant communities have integrated into the UK. Some communities have been much more successful than others, but there have been particular issues in deprived communities, particularly communities coming from some areas of Pakistan, for example, where communities have remained very insular. And that is a problem. And, that's where I would go on to disagree quite strongly with our second witness, Simon Levine, who seemed to think, well, it's absolutely no problem at all if you come to this country and you don't make an effort to integrate and you stick to your own culture and customs. I think that's hugely problematic.
Could I add, though, that in a way, the multicultural experiment was allowed to, let's say, use the word fester, right? Nobody really cared about who was mixing with whom until the terrorist bombings, right? 7/7 or even 9/11. And suddenly we started looking at these communities through the prism of violence and insularity. And I think the problem goes much deeper, that actually, why hasn't our government been able to say to these insular communities, and you're right, these are largely Pakistani, Mirpuri communities, a lot of them at least, that there are other ways of living. What I didn't like about Matthew Syed was when he went on his monologue about cousin marriages, he said, I want to liberate these people. There's another way of being. Now, whether he's right or wrong, that's the kind of language that leads to further resentment. And my concern is that, yes, you should be concerned about the insularity and what goes on. But how does a commission look into that, and how does it change things?
Well, I wonder why that would lead to further resentment. I mean, if you move into a society, I think it's reasonable to expect people to sign up to certain values and uphold certain principles in order to keep that society cohesive. Or why should it be a source of resentment to demand newcomers to integrate within wider society?
But you see, what does successful integration look like? That's what I'm asking. And that was my question to him. I think I'm completely part of British society. There are certain things I don't do. And then by Matthew's code of how you should be British, that's not integrated enough because he's against certain things.
Yes. Jonathan, if you go along with Matthew Syed and say, well, the reason there are problems after this period of success, in inverted commas, over multiculturalism is because of these very high levels of net inward migration, is because of the political correctness over things like the Pakistani glooming gowns. None of these are likely to be dealt with by this new commission.
Well, that's plainly right. I think there's a tendency to concentrate too much on extreme events like grooming gangs, however common they may be, and obviously the riots following the Southport murders. These involve marginal groups of violent or exploitative criminals, and their disclosure is followed by common revulsion against violence and law-breaking. I don't think that either the violence or the condemnation of it tell us much about social cohesion. These things are too marginal to the experience of daily life.
I would disagree with that in relation to the people who lived in these communities where rape gangs were operating. It didn't feel marginal in those communities, and I think it's not just about the level and scale of the criminal practice, which was huge. It was about institutional reactions to it and the lack of the agencies that should have stepped up to protect these girls. We know worries
I agree with all of that.
But that is social cohesion.
I agree with all that, but I disagree with you when you say it is social cohesion. Social cohesion is about the behaviour of ordinary law-abiding people in the ordinary course of their life, and not about reactions to marginal
But it
scandals.
is about the reaction of ordinary law-abiding public officials who don't challenge these criminal practices.
That's a problem, but it's a different problem.
But do you think that's just because they were scared? of being called racist? Or do you think, as some findings have shown, that actually a lot of people didn't care? They didn't care because, unfortunately, they saw the girls as white working class girls. And that also has to be taken into account.
I think it's a mix of things. I think it's partly that, but it's not just that. I think they were scared of upsetting cultural tensions. I think there are also political factors at play. I think some local officials are very dependent on people in local communities for votes from their own community. So I think it was a complex mix of things, but the fact that it was not challenged properly at the local level is part of cohesion.
Inaya, the central question was one of difference, wasn't it, in this programme tonight? To what extent it's desirable to promote a national identity and to, I suppose, discourage cultural separateness? I mean, not at all, according to Simon Levine.
Yeah, I think that people actually on the whole don't want to just live in silos and don't just want to say that this group is different and have a culturally and morally relativist view. I think actually we want to feel like we belong and that we're part of something greater than our immutable characteristics. And that's why I agree with Jonathan in the sense that, we need to encourage people and find a way to encourage people to have something that they're loyal to, that transcends their individual identity. And I think the problem that we've had with multiculturalism is that it says actually, no, your racial identity, your religious identity, your cultural identity, that's what matters. That's how funding's going to be distributed. That's how you're going to be engaged with. And actually the nation and the national story has been weakened.
Mona, I think that's absolutely right. I agree entirely.
Mm-hmm. Mona, the question that didn't seem to emerge with any sort of clarity is what can this commission actually do? What can the government actually do? It can pass laws and it can hand out taxpayers' money, but in what way?
What can it do to bring people together? What can it do to say we should have a bigger pool of friends? It can't do any of that. I think where there are criminal practices, yes, it can look into that. And I think a lot of our discussion has actually been about cultural, where we've used cultural norms, where actually we're talking about criminal acts. But I'm at a loss as to what is this commission going to tell me that I don't already know? And when it comes to social cohesion and how people get along with one another, that kind of thing demands something from our interior life. Like, what do we want? The kind of intimacy, intellectual, social, emotional, most of my friends I have very little in common with, but actually I like them because they enrich my life for all kinds of reasons. How is the Commission going to look into that?
I'll have to leave that question hanging in the air because time's run out, and that's it for this week. From our panel, Jonathan Sumption, Sonia Sodha, Mona Siddiqui and Inaya Folarin Iman, and from me, until the same time next week,